Hey, welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD user monthly training webinar. This is Eric Bobrow, your host, talking to you from San Rafael, California, with my special guest, Andrew Passacantando of New Jersey, who will be sharing some of his work today. How are you doing, Andrew?
Hi, very well, Eric. Thank you.
Let's
Glad to
make
be
sure that,
here.
yeah, let's make sure that everybody can hear us. And right now, you're just seeing the ArchiCAD user homepage, I believe. And Andrew doesn't have a webcam handy, so we won't see him during this session, but I will post up a picture that Andrew just sent me so you can visualize him, at least for the recording and things like that. Let me just check, make sure everybody's seeing us and hearing it. Okay, so yeah, Gerald says here and see you. Okay, just to type in where you're calling in from and maybe what the weather's like, because I expect that we'll have people from all over the place, all over the world. We usually at least go from Australia through North America to the UK and parts of Europe. Let's see, Richard in Bermuda, Stan in Portland, John, Salt Spring Island, BC. Yep, Denver, Abbotsford. All right. Um, okay. So actually several from Denver. Interesting. Chris Craver and Paul Adams and James Powers and we have a good crowd in the Colorado area. Okay, and Eric from South Africa, Martin from Austria. All right, good stuff. All right, so let me just tell you a little bit of what we're going to be doing today in the next hour or a little bit more than an hour. This is a second of our monthly series of training webinars for ArchiCAD users around the world, part of the new ArchiCAD user website, which I set up originally a few years ago, but didn't really pay much attention to it for a while, got busy. And now this year, I'm really going to build it out as a resource for ArchiCAD users around the world. The centerpiece of the program will be the monthly training webinars in which I interview advanced users like Andrew and Tim Ball last month. The recordings are then posted on the site. In many cases, we'll also have downloads. So Andrew has agreed to share his project file, which is really an extraordinary thing to be able to look inside a project file, as well as the BIMX. And I just got a copy from Tim Ball of his BIMX from the project that he shared last month. And I'll be adding other resources to the site, including, for example, the member list. If you go to the member list here, you can see it grouped by country. It takes a few seconds to sort of organize, but you can see different people who've signed up so far. We have several hundred who've signed up. You can go and look at the expanded list, which will take a while to scroll through because it actually, every single one of these is opened up here. There will be a jobs board as well, and some other networking and communication and discussion boards. I have some plans that I think are going to make it a really interesting site to spend time on. But for today's session, if we go back here, we're going to be having Andrew Passacantando. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about your background just architecturally and your work with ArchiCAD. When did you get started with ArchiCAD?
Well, I've been using ArchiCAD since version 6, and that's 1998. And I was working based in New Jersey. We've done primarily residential work, mostly wood framed, very traditional work in the area. And in this area and some of the surrounding states, there's a plentiful amount of older buildings. So there's a lot of documenting older buildings, surveying what's there. I used to hand draw. I drew for at least 15 years on a board, Mayline, lead pencil on Mylar. I did that for literally for a decade. I was very good at it. I was very fast at it. And next wave of technology was two-dimensional AutoCAD, and I never got onto that. I was the guy that did the drawings and handed it off to people in the firm, and they drew it on AutoCAD, and I was, in a good way, doing a lot of design work, but I never really got up to speed with any type of CAD at all. I was at a seminar. I saw a three-dimensional version of this software, which was version 6. That's a long time ago. And they were showing a building turning around on a screen, and it was virtual to me at that point. You could see in it, you could hover over it, you could magic wand a roof onto a lay of walls and create immediately a instant floor plan, roof plan, pop in windows. So it was a revolution for me to see that as somebody that did a lot of hand drawing. So I literally went from hand drawing to BIM. It was very odd path. Most people come from at least multiple versions of other software before they get into BIM.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrew, I'm going to make you presenter. That means that you're going to be able to share your screen. So just go ahead and click to say that you want to show your screen. And,
okay.
And I assume that you'll have the project file up or some renderings of it up to show us, and tell us a little bit about this project and sort of the context of this project compared to, you know, your other work. So go ahead and, all right, we are seeing your screen. And so tell us a little bit about this project, and is it typical of your other work? I know it's one that you're currently working on, and it's actually being built out right now. Is that right?
That's correct. So this is, I wanted to use this house as an example to kind of show some methods that I use to model a building that's actually a historic building. This is a Victorian, built in 1871. It's here in New Jersey, and it was slightly not taken care of that well. I mean, it's a 150-year-old structure. It's a single-family home. It's been rented over the years. A lot of stuff has been torn up and thrown out, and people put in apartments where there shouldn't be apartments, and the original kitchen was a mess. But the structure was there, and it had an enormous amount of detail. You can even see in this image, they painted a lot of the trim black, just odd way of renovating. All the original railing was rotted. This is just temporary stuff somebody bought at a lumber yard. It's an existing image of the building. This building is a freestanding single-family house built in 1871 amongst a development. The development was granted rights in an urban area or within the city to put in brick townhomes that are 3 stories high, and were granted multiple variances. This building shares the parking lot of the brick structures, but in doing so, the town said, this is a historic building on a historic street. We don't want to see it torn down and 2 more brick townhomes put here. So this was the very last building to be addressed. The client is a developer, came to me and said, we want to turn this back, you know, basically reverse the clock and bring this back to a beautiful single family home. It's just about 6,000 square feet. It does have a finished 3rd floor. Looks very tall ceilings. These are about 9'6" on both floors. There's a fireplace in every bedroom. Very typical. That was your heat source in 1871. A lot of this structure had to get rebuilt. If you look at this chimney, you can see things are tilting 3-4 inches out of square. These were all brought down and rebuilt. All the windows had to be replaced. It didn't have any insulation. It had old wiring. It had knob and tube wiring in the attic. Multiple beams have been cut up throughout the years of people adding, whether it's plumbing or electric. So that all had to be addressed. I can show you this. This is the actual floor plan. And the way I started this, and I wanted to get into how this is documented, because the document part of the structure is actually as important as the modeling. So this building is a finished 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. It has a basement, but it's not a finished basement. So this had to be sourced and surveyed, the entire thing. And I did that with a handheld laser, which is a very, very useful tool. They're about $100 to $200, depending on what version you use. There's made by Bosch, made by Milwaukee, Leica. Small handheld device. You can point it and shoot your overalls up to a 1/16 of an inch accuracy, up to 150 feet. And that is how I documented this structure. And I would measure all the windows, all the walls, ceiling heights. And believe me, the ceiling heights are different in every room, because there are some ceilings that over the years might have leaked and sagged, and they put another layer of drywall on the ceiling. The floors were 3 inches out of level. They might have put vinyl over it. There's what's called scab work. They would do a lot of scab work to get things level, but not fix what was actually causing the leak. Either way, I would measure this, taking about 2 full business days on site. So if you figure 16 hours, maybe even more, document every single floor. And the most important thing is to document jams. And when I say that, I'm going to zoom in here. Well, what I mean is the actual wall. When you walk through an opening, what is that true dimension? Even though these walls might have been 2 by 4, in 1871, that's an actual size, so that it's a full 4-inch, and they're doing plaster and lath. The plaster and lath has a dimension. It's going to be much more than 1/2-inch drywall. And the only way to know what that core really looks like is by measuring the jam. So every single jam is measured and modeled that way. When I go into creating the model, I have all this data. It's handwritten on 8.5 by 11 sheets. I'll scan all of those as one PDF document. That PDF document sits on my second monitor, and I highly recommend, if you're an ArchiCAD user, you have 2 screens. And that's an actual industry standard. You're 40% more effective or more efficient with 2 monitors. The monitor, I don't know if you can tell, the monitor I'm looking at right now is 43 inches in angle on the angle. It's a Dell, $1,000. There's a lot of real estate. I can easily have 2 files open almost at full scale on this screen, but it gives me the ability to always look at a much bigger image and not have to continuously pan in and out, because when you're doing that, you're wasting time. The other idea is to not open and close endlessly windows that are down here. It's somewhat efficient, but it's much more efficient to have a screen where you're just turning your head or angling your eyes and looking at either your photograph of the site or your sketches, which are hand drawn. And I can always zoom in on them, zoom back out, open up an image of what this fireplace looks like, what these windows look like. And then when I'm modeling it, I can easily say, okay, yeah, I remember that looked like that, but here's the actual image. So after I field verify this with dimensions, I then photograph it. The photography, and I don't mean using an iPhone, you go in with a very good camera. I use a mirrorless Sony camera. I have a zoom lens, and I have a wide angle lens. Now, inside these rooms with a wide angle lens, I can shoot the entire room with 2 images. And I can stand here and see this fireplace. I can see these windows. I'll see the jam. So there's a lot more detail in a wide angle lens. Then
Andrew,
go ahead.
Do you have the option to show us some of the raw photos that you took so we can see that wide angle effect?
Yeah, I can call that up. I'll do that while I'm talking. The let's see, pull that up. The outside on a building like this, there's a tremendous amount of detail. Some of that I can reach with a ladder. Some of it I can't. I'm not going to go 32 feet up on a ladder to measure the cornice. But a camera with a zoom lens certainly can. So you can stand at ground level and take a very close image with a 200 zoom lens and get a very crisp, clean detail of what that really looks like. I'll pull one of those up. So I'm sharing a screen here. This is basically how I'll categorize a lot of these photos. Cornice details, if you can see these folders that I have set up, cornice details, some exterior brickwork. The front door had a lot of detail. I put that in its own folder. The porch has a tremendous amount of detail. Put that in its own folder. Then I can quickly walk around with these detailed images.
Can you open them up bigger?
Yep.
Oh, now it's finally coming.
Now you're looking at an existing photograph. That's why you see a lot of crazy paint and things that we're going to remove in this, the landscaping, but this is existing. And if I flip through these are high resolution, and I can zoom in on these on the other screen. Now, when we get into modeling, I'm going to need to know what that cornice rake projection is. These rake projections meet, and they're in the same line on this side of the building. It's not the same everywhere. You can see it's different on the porch. It's a little bit different on the other sides. But I can zoom in on this and get a better level of detail of what I need. Now, this happened to be taken in an overcast day. I would go back on a sunnier day and make sure that I can see exactly what's going on there if I needed. But these are walking around the exterior, and I'm taking that shot standing on the ground with a zoom lens. It was a challenge because they painted everything black, and black does not give me a really crisp sunlight detail so I can get these profiles. Sometimes I would put up a ladder and take a snapshot with a camera up close. And then this is where the camera really comes into play, is how big are these rakes? Where do the rakes terminate? Are they consistently that same detail? This type of stuff, I'll measure the overall. I'll measure this dimension in 2 dimensions on the floor plan. I'll draw that, create a slab, turn it into a morph, rotate it, and now I have these 2 brackets.
So can you show that, Andrew? And while you're bringing that back up, a comment from Seth said, "Such a comprehensive survey, it must have taken time. Was it necessary?" So please, address how deep you felt it was necessary to do this, how accurately, where did you draw the line?
Okay, so this structure is in a historic neighborhood, and it needed variances, and it also needed approval from the historic board. The historic board is going to look at it that we are going to do an addition. The addition has to be complementary, or at least in harmony with what's there. The more detail and the more that I can truly represent in the model and in a final rendering that I'll present to them, the easier they'll understand it and the easier that this will be approved. So here I'm standing on the street. You can see some of the brick townhomes on the far right side. This is existing. This is taken before we're really working at all. All these cars are here. They're parked for the construction of the townhomes. All of this was documented on site with either a yellow tape or overalls. Obviously, we're done with lasers. And then the entire interior was done by hand. Overalls, height, width, jamb dimensions, door heights, door profiles, door widths. And what I ended up with is all of that data, which is then placed into the model. The most important thing with a model, and I'm going to pull up another drawing, is before you get started at all with a model, you have to really understand the cross section. So this happened to be a detached garage, but you can see here, that is a screenshot of my desktop, 100% 2D drawing. That's all it is. I know that I want a certain roof pitch, that this is going to flare. A 2x10 is going to sit on a sill plate. So I'll model either existing or new what I truly want this to look like. Then start modeling. But I don't do any modeling until I really understand what it is that I'm trying to achieve for the final. And that gets into, here's an actual cut through this, and I'll put in joists and stuff like that at a later date. But the true model, if I pull up this model and do a quick three-dimensional type of thing here.
And while you do that, a couple of quick questions. Ignacio asks, are you taking the dimensions with the laser? He has a Leica but can't do that. And then similar question from Steve Pribble. How did you get dimensions of rakes and details that you can't reach?
Some of it was repeated. So there were a few different areas on this house that had a repeated rake and cornice at ground level. Now the rake might have been farther on the top floor. In other words, we have a 3-foot rake projection and a 3-foot cornice projection on the top floor, but the bed molding and the outer projection of the crown was the same profiles that were at ground level. So I would measure the crown and things like that at ground level, and then that would give me enough information when I went up top, knowing that that's pretty much what's going to be up top. So all of this stuff, I'll spin the sun around here. Was first surveyed, and that I can't emphasize how important that is. This projection right here, I could easily create that two-dimensionally in a complex profile, first drawing lines and circles and arcs from field measuring, but is it going to be one continuous complex profile that returns on itself, which this happens to do? So this projection is the same as that. If it's not, I would need two complex profiles. I would need the outer band as one profile, and I would need this, and then I would probably make that with a slab. Since this is all the same, I can easily make one complex profile and run that around just the way you would do a wall. So the way I work is I will try to draw two-dimensionally as much that will pertain to this project, and that will become complex profiles. Where you see the word LK Maple on the right side of my screen, where I'm actually scrolling through complex profiles, where it says BIM built, these are in my template. These are going to show up no matter what model I open up. These are my standards.
BIM built is your firm name?
Yes. So what I do is that tells me right away I made that. It's not coming in from ArchiCAD. It's not coming in from another file or somewhere else. If I open up a clean version of my template, this is all preloaded. Now I know when I measure this house, let's take an interior wall. A 2x4 interior wall doesn't have 1/2 inch on each side on this house. Now most homes would, or they'd have 5/8 or 2x6, but I can easily come in here, pick up one of my stock files, and then edit it. So I would open this up. You can see right here, this is one that comes in on every file. And right away with this button right here, duplicate. If I click duplicate, I would then save it with my new file. This is my file. Every single file has that name. If I come up with a complex profile, a surface, a model part that I made, anything, I'm going to know right away that it is pertaining just to this file. And the way that I get all of these to show up neatly up top is when you name your file, that's this button. If I click on rename, you can see that you can add a space. So if there's one space right now in front of there, just a blank space, that puts it up top. If I put 2 in there, it's going to jump alphabetically all the way to the top. So right now you can see if I scroll through these are all components that make up either a rake or a complex profile or a water table or a hand railing pertaining just to this project. And you can see I come through here. Now, if I pick this one up, let's see, I'll come through just to show you a few more of these. Let's take this one, for example. See how I have this material is measuring 5/8. That would be plaster over actual wood lath. This gives me the ability to make a very thin wall. This is only 1 3/4 inches. There are some areas where they used a 2x4 on the flat and put plaster on both sides. Now, if you look over here, I have the horizontal stretch turned on, the vertical stretch, and obviously the opening reference in case there's a door or window. If I turn off horizontal stretch, you're going to see these two blue lines disappear. I'm sorry, I meant vertical. The reason you want them underneath is because that is the actual size of your top plate. I have a bottom plate and a top plate. I don't want this to stretch between these, or it's going to, if I made this 10 feet tall, these are going to be 6 inches each. It's going to become out of scale. But the wall itself would in reality be any height that that wall is. Now, making this very small gives me the ability to make a very short wall or a very tall wall. If I automatically model this 8 feet tall, I wouldn't be able to get this somewhere on this site at 7 feet tall. So basically there's a lot more time put up front getting this set up. And I do that before I start modeling. Modeling can come later. Modeling, I used to use the expression for a friend that got into this as a car race. They don't just show up at the car race and start inflating tires and hoping the engine works. They'll spend a month getting everything dialed in. Now, on a job like this, I might spend 6 hours setting this all up before I'm placing my first wall. And that's so it's accurate. And that's so I can easily stretch in any direction a complex profile. When I put in a section, it's automatically going to show everything that I want. So here's a typical outside wall. Plaster, lath, meaning the wood lath, skip lath, a 2x4 wall. This measured 4 1/8, odd dimension, but they were hand cut in 1871. This would have been a rough sawn 2x material in the basement. Now that was open to the eye, so I could walk through the basement and truly measure what this was. This actually measured 9 1/2. I believe it was 1 1/2 inches. Some of them were 1 3/4 inches, but primarily they were solid sawn, and I would just model it that way. Now, I can stretch this between these two blue lines because I have my horizontal and vertical. It's going to stretch horizontally. Some areas, these walls, I don't know what's in that wall. They might have plastered this twice. They've had water leaks, and they would put 2 layers of a 1/2 inch, then they had molding, and then they had some other junk. But I knew the wall was much thicker because I could measure the jamb. The jamb meaning the dimension of the door frame. Now, during demolition, a lot of things became apparent to the eye. Oh, now I see why that was so thick. They built that entire ceiling down to avoid a cast iron toilet from the second floor. So a lot of things became apparent after demolition. But primarily, this project, and I would say any project, you spend the time on a renovation surveying what's there, photographing it, interior, exterior, really organized folders for photos, and then start creating your cross cuts of where you want your profiles. So when I look at something like that, the name of this is the name of my file, first floor kitchen cornice, meaning this is not the first floor on the entire building. This is just at the kitchen where I surveyed it, had a massive bed molding. Now you can remember that is a simple, I have it as a generic interior material. If I hover here and right click, oops, if I right click on that, I can either change the fill, change the line that this is representing. I can change the material. That's by using the left click. See this right here, set parameters for profile edge, clicked edge, or all edges. So if I clicked all edges, I can change what that paint color is instantly on every single surface. If I come over here, you're going to see this is an aluminum drip edge. It's part of this complex profile. I'm going to left click and hold the left click button down. Slide over here, set parameters for profiled edge. You can see I have a material called metal aluminum. This could be copper, this could be lead, this could be rubber. So basically it's whatever material was truly in the field. Now this was a metal aluminum piece of material, and then you can change that color. When I come over to the floor plan, one second.
So one of the things that was quite fascinating, Andrew, was that you had everything drawn, or not everything, you had a lot of 2D work drawn underneath and around the building. I think that'll be very interesting just to show how you have that organized.
Okay, I'll show you that. So what I do is, you can see the point of origin is right here. That's 0, 0. ArchiCAD is more efficient if you place your model in what's known as the positive X and positive Y, closer to that point. That's why you can see my model is maybe 20 feet north of the X origin. I know that I'm going to start modeling this building in this location. Before I start doing that, I know that this is a renovation, so right away I'm using these tools. It's either whatever I'm drawing, it's either on existing, it's on demolition, or it's on new. Now I'm in the new renovation filter. That's why this one is not highlighted. Everything that I start drawing, I will organize on this almost like a worksheet. I set this up similar to a worksheet. Now I have worksheets and I will do a whole lot of 2D and I'll bring in PDFs and different ideas, but I don't want to get this overly cluttered. The reason I like doing this on the floor plan is I can leave myself notes. What was I working on? What did I draw? So you can see here, this line is on a non-plot. This will not show up on my floor plan. It will not show up in a section. It doesn't show up on the electric plans, but it's on a non-plot layer and it's existing. And it's also saying I wrote that two-dimensionally, existing porch cornice detail. Now I drew that from my field notes. I stood on a ladder with a tape and measured this. That is the cornice for my porch, not everywhere on the building. The reason I hand draw this is because computer draw this is because at some point I'm going to have to go back to this. I might want to verify, was that really 1 or 11? What, it seems like on the back of the building it's 13 inches. So I know what it is that I drew. The porch had dentils. This becomes a complex profile. And I wrote that here, see complex profile. Reason I did this is because this is one building, it's one file. The phone's going to ring and I'm going to have to jump on another project. I'm going to close this down. 3 days are going to go by. Somebody's going to be wanting something because their building's burning and everything. Everybody's having a heart attack. So this will get closed. I'll jump back in here, I'll open it up, and I won't remember what I was doing. But if I write notes, I'll easily remember, oh, that's right, I was working on this. See complex profile, and I might have more notes even in that complex profile. Now, this building had dentils. dentals, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's that cornice. You are looking at that piece of aluminum. Now they painted it black and I changed it to black just so it looked realistic. This was all white all the way down to this point. Now, when I say dental, I mean these little blocks. These are historic dental blocks. Now, I can't get them to skip like that in a complex profile. So I will, in plan, draw this complex profile just like a wall, and then in plan put one tiny little slab, and then I'm on a PC, I'll use a Control U or a Command drag copies, and I'll copy these the correct spacing. So I'll measure the dental in the field, and then I know it's 3/4 of an inch gap, and I'll march them all the way across and then group them. You could, if you wanted to, turn them into a library part. You could turn them into a morph, just so you don't have a whole sea of these little slabs all over the place. So it's really whatever you think is easier. Now, the reason I drew this and rendered it is because this then explained a picture to the people in the field when they were building this. Obviously, they have the PDF, they have the BIMX model, they have my CDs, but when you open up with that type of image, they say an image is 1,000 words. It just explains a picture much faster than a 2D drawing. Then, when I'm back on the plan, I can either print that out 1-to-1, in other words, full scale, and plot it. So what they're going to do in the field is print that out, take my print, which is 1-to-1. It barely fits on a 2x3 foot sheet. If it doesn't, I'll send it out on a 3x4. They'll tape it to a sheet of Luan, and that becomes their template. They'll cut out a sheet of Luan, which is 1/4 inch plywood, and cut that. And that is truly, to me, BIM. That is where you're taking the information from a model, sending it to guys in the field that are not everybody in the field is walking around with an iPad. Guys have tool belts and vans and trucks, and they just want the print of what they need to build, and that's all they need. So that's where this really shines.
So,
yep.
So Andrew, you and I had talked a little bit about the use of BIMX and communicating the model in the field and having multiple versions of the BIMX file depending upon what phase they're in or what crew is in there. Do you have some saved views just from the current model or can you just show what you might do when they're working on the foundation or working on the kitchen, as you mentioned?
I think what I have in here, I could show, I'm trying to think what would explain that. Let's say something like this, where I might do I'll even do screenshots all the time, and I'll send that directly to the builder really quick, even on the phone. He might say, is this rafter sitting on a top plate? Is this projecting out? What's the spacing of these modillion blocks? If it's modeled correctly and you put up your time, when this is under construction, I'm not recreating this or spending time trying to get them that information. So the graph of where you spend a lot of time is a curve that starts up pretty high and then it starts to taper down. What Eric asked, there's a lot of I think if I have any foundation drawings. Let me think. But what I'll do is remember that you can call up anything that's in the 3D window becomes a BIMX file. You can save whatever's in that window as a BIMX file. This might be a big bracket. I could save that as a BIMX file. I can send that over to the builder. He can rotate that. He can click on anywhere he wants and get the dimensions. I can also print this 1-to-1, which is what I did, and they use that as the template. The beauty of being able to turn on and off layers is you can send the builder just the foundation as a BIMX file, turn off all the interior walls, turn off all the plumbing, turn off all the dimensions, and create something that's a whole lot cleaner for the person in the field that's just doing the foundation. So if I jump over here and just do the foundation, let's see here. Now, right now, this is for the plan, but you can see I'll carry data with that wall. This wall has a complex profile that will have that stone. That stone is there. It has that shelf. It does step up to this old foundation. We knew we had to put in a beam here, which is probably on the first floor. But I can easily do a screenshot of that and email it instantly, or update. And right now I can click File, Save As, and save that as a BIMX file. If that makes sense, if that really is what they want to see. If they want to just the here, remember, you can, whatever you highlight, hit F5, and now that's the only thing in your window. That might be better. That might explain this to the masons. And a lot comes up on these old buildings as to what's tying into what, where does the rebar turn. It does prevent having to do endless site visits. It's faster, and you can get people information right away. So that's where you're using the model for verbal, or either clarifying what's being built for the entire duration of the project. If I go back to here, trying to see what other images I might have, but all of these would be explaining a picture of where we want things to terminate, what's sitting on what. You know, I can print these little balusters to scale. All of this was complex profiles. Every single thing here you're looking at is a complex profile. Now, I might have turned it into a morph because the morphs were easier at the end to punch an opening like that. A complex profile is going to run continuous. I would use solid element operator. I would have a slab floating in space on what's called solid element operator, meaning it's only showing up when I'm in my modeling version of this. It's not going to show up on the plan or anything like that. And then I can, you know, highlight this, go through the application of deleting that, and then leave that solid element operator where it is. Mm-hmm. So that's, go ahead.
Andrew, yeah, there's a few questions that have stacked up. So if it's okay, let's sort of take a break from your rolling presentation and just answer some of these before they get too far in the background. So let me just go actually from the more recent ones. Well, Steve Nichols says, it's new to me that you can create a partial BIMX. So basically, I think when you say save as, you can say save as BIMX. That is a 3D. It's not the BIMX Pro or Docs version with the extra layouts and drawings included, but you could actually save that, because in fact, when you create a BIMX Pro file, you can choose whether you want to save, which 3D view you want to save, or possibly more than one. And I know you talked about, did you save like an existing versus new, sometimes in the same BIMX file, so that people could switch back and forth between existing
and absolutely, especially for the builder. The builder would be the one that would really want to see, okay, I see what's being demolished, what we're saving. They would be the one person that would walk through and say, yes, this is an advantage, existing versus new. For just about every other trade, that they would just want to see.
So I know you demonstrated just briefly that save as BIMX is there, but in terms of the publish command, when you're doing that, do you have a BIMX a publisher set that we can just sort of take a look at your settings right now?
Oh, I don't know how. I'll have that in.
Yeah, so you have a BIMX large.
Yeah, large, small. But what I usually do is, it depends if everybody needs the documents. In other words, the general contractor on the project certainly is going to get the full set of drawings. So he's going to have this full set that will then get updated, electrical, things like that. A lot of times, that's, of course, that's the one big BIMX file that carries everything. I think the question was coming from, can we just save, in other words, what I'm looking at right now as a BIMX file? So yeah, you absolutely can do that. And that is where somebody might be at an advantage to say, okay, I just want to see what you're doing with this porch. What are these screen profiles look like? What does that corner look like? Because I went through all the sheets on the construction drawing and this never really showed up. So these are things like, yeah, that's on the fly. You can come up with that type of information, either with a screenshot or a BIMX file.
Okay, but in the when you're publishing a BIMX Pro with the documents, you have it as a publisher set, and generally you're going to have the sheets that you want to include, and you're also going to have one or possibly more saved 3D views. Do you have a publisher set for BIMX that has a saved 3D view in there?
I don't in this model. In this model, I just sent out all of the renderings, which came during the, while we were building this. So I don't have that set up in this file.
All right, then let me just explain briefly for, just training purposes. When you do a publish command in BIMX, that's in the publisher, you need to have a 3D view or possibly more than one 3D view in that publisher set, along with as many drawings, layouts as you want to include. And it will export, because BIMX doesn't have layer control in quite the same way, it doesn't have layer combinations, it will export one or two or as many 3D models as you decide. It can balloon up the file size, but you can have a structural and a full architectural, two different versions. You could have existing and new, two different versions. You could have several variations. And then in the BIMX file, you can just choose between which one you want to be looking at. So that's in the publisher settings for the BIMX. Now let me just go to the other questions that were stacked up. You show the complex profile as a single piece. At what point and where do you show the pieces of molding to create that profile?
Okay, so to create that profile, if I go back on this plan, which is, remember, I'll have a layer called, this is preliminary design. In other words, it's showing existing and new, demos turned off, and two-dimensionally, I will draw, this happens to be existing porch, I'm zooming in. This is where those profiles were created. I can group all these lines and copy and come over here and paste lines. Remember, they're going to show up as construction lines. A line doesn't show up in a complex profile. So all of those lines will come in. Then you use a fill, the correct fill with the correct surface material to just show one continuous big profile. Now, if I wanted this to be its own fill, in other words, if I wanted that, sorry about that, if I wanted this bed molding to show individually and I want to see this part come up here because that helps tell the story, these would be individual fills. And then I could break that out and get this to be exact, all of these little parts. The reason I don't do that here is it wasn't necessary, and I'm not 100% sure what was behind all those moldings to start assuming this one's an inch thick, that type of thing.
So basically, if the element is going to be constructed and they need to make it out of pieces, then you can do that. On the other hand, if you're modeling an existing thing, then you really only need the outside volume to show up, because you're not going to be cutting through that existing element. So it functionally appears in the model. So I think it's always, what are you going to gain from breaking it up into pieces? If you're going to build it out of pieces, that may be helpful.
Here's breaking it up into pieces. So this isn't just a stock wall that's done with the standard wall that's showing a material on left and right, top and bottom. and is a generic 5 inches wide. This truly is, each one of these is a fill, and a different fill than the one neighboring it. And each one of these, if I left click and hold my mouse button down, you can change that to what that material really is. So when you do a partial section, it shows up as wood, and it's saying not just that clicked edge, which is what I did. You would want all edges. So that entire, well, let's say stud, the wood stud in that wall is going to show up as a wood material. And it also gets into, jump over here, it gets into the building priorities. So you have to also watch your building priorities. When I put a wood, let's say a wood floor here, I want the wood floor to either cut that or not cut that, or if this is sitting on a finished floor, I want the finished floor to be a smaller numbered priority than that. So that's where I said it takes a little bit of time to set this up, but the modeling is much faster.
Can you cut a section where you have a similar type of wall and show it at the full height? Because I think there are some people who probably don't understand that you've made a short little piece because you could stretch it from that minimum height to a real 7 or 8 feet or 10 feet height. So if you cut a section, either a real section or a 3D cutaway, then we can look at it. The other thing I want to point out, just from a training, so while you get that ready, from a training perspective, is that the lumber that has, you're seeing an X through it, the way that that's simulated, or the way that Andrew's creating it, is making several triangular pieces. So go ahead and cut, I guess, you have a section that already exists that you can just open up?
I'm just gonna drag this section marker. Another quick idea, just for when you're modeling. This section marker is sitting on a non-plot layer. So every time I come over to my preliminary design first floor, I'm going to have just about every existing and new layer that I need turned on to model. So it's showing the roof, it's showing the floor, it's showing the walls, it's showing the material that's going around this window. But what you also want are sections at a minimum 4, 2 of them going left to right and 2 of them going top to bottom. That is so you can very quickly just drag one of these in place and open it, and not have to spend the time to come over here, create one, put it there, delete it, rotate this. That's burning time. So I'll have these at least 4 always show up on the model. So I'm going to open up this section just so you get an idea of what a actual cut looks like. So if I zoom in here, you can see there's a complex profile. I'm going to hover over it and hold down the shift key, and you can see it's saying LK, do that again, LK Maple porch window head. Here's my wall. Now some of these lines disappeared. I can go back in here and make that show up. But you can see that most of this is pre-drawn. So that dimension of outside material, outside skip sheathing, they didn't have plywood, they used a 7/8 diagonal board, full 4-inch wall, lath and plaster is going to show up. These floors, go to this one, are going to be multiple levels. So you're going to see that is a slab that's shown as a complex profile, but it's a
why are we not seeing the framing X's? Is that a graphic override, or
I think that's a graphic override, and I have that set up in the preliminary design.
Can you show us one of your real sections that would have the actual 2x framing in there? Because that's what I wanted to highlight, at least, because it is such a common question. How do you get real framing, wall, just the wall section, to show all of that detail? And I know you've mastered it. I just want to be able to show people.
So here's a live section, and here's where it's showing up shaded, what's new, and then you can see this is the floor, and there you can see a version of wood. This is just a standard 2x10. This is the new section. This would be 5/8 sheetrock. That 5/8 sheetrock gets automatically cut out of that top plate because that top plate in my complex profile is a higher building material priority than the drywall.
All right, so Andrew, can you right click on that particular wall and say edit complex profile? That will actually then show us the short version of that wall. So this is the short version, and you can see that the top plate is at the top, but the distance between it and the bottom plate is just a very short distance. And basically that's done because you can stretch things taller, but you can't make them shorter. So you make it way shorter than you need, and then you can just make it whatever height you need. The other thing is just, can you select the individual triangles, at least 2 or 3 of them, one at a time, and say what they are?
Yeah, so this right here will be, if you look on the far left, is gypsum board. If I click on gypsum board, it's only a building priority of 300. Now in that cross section, you could see that ceiling came marching across, it kept going, and it disappeared when it sat on top of this stud. This top plate is a fill called wood light frame strong, and you can see the 300 is going to be smaller than the 647. So immediately, without getting into solid element operators and all that stuff, it's automatically deleted.
And just do one of the side triangles just to show that it's a different one.
So you can put the lines will show up when these are different. So when you start putting these in as different materials, let's see here, I have wood light frame vertical, wood light frame strong. Then in the cross section, that line will show up.
Yeah, so that's just an important tip for all of you who are wondering how to do framing like that inside a complex profile. Is you can't draw lines. All you can have is the lines between adjacent fills, each fill representing most of the time a skin like plaster. But in the case of the framing, those X's are created by 4 separate fills that have lines between them because they're different types. They are, just named slightly differently, and that's why they show up as if they were made differently. So we know that they're actually 2 pieces of wood stacked on top of each other with an X to indicate that they're cut. But for ArchiCAD, it thinks that there are, in that case, 8 little triangular pieces of something. It's a kludgy workaround, but it actually works quite well. So, which brings into not the workaround, but just this performance of the model. You've been moving around the model pretty fluidly.
Okay.
And this is a 5,800 square foot building with both existing and new. Question is, how big is that file? Does the size of the model affect the performance?
I can tell you quickly. Let me look up the file size. I would say it's not that big a file. Let me do that real quick.
So ArchiCAD's gotten better, of course, as the computers have gotten faster, and Graphisoft has optimized some of the stuff. But file size,
it's 373 megabytes.
Okay, so in the old days, 373 megabytes was a mega file. It was something that you'd go, oh my God, how could you possibly work with it? But now that we have routinely 16 gigabytes of RAM in many computers, and even more in some, 373 megabytes is not a big deal. And ArchiCAD's dealing with it obviously very efficiently. How long does it take to generate a section? Is it like just a few seconds, or does it take longer?
It's probably a few seconds. It's another thing with as far as a conversation on hardware. I'm using a PC. I try to upgrade every 3 years. I don't recommend trying to get a machine to last 4 years unless it's being used for other things other than ArchiCAD. But ArchiCAD is a very robust program. You need a lot more RAM than they recommend. You know, on the website of Graphisoft, they're going to give you what works, but you really need a lot more than that.
Mhm.
And I would highly recommend solid state drives. You know, no more of the spinning CDs and that kind of stuff. Use solid state drives. And I also get asked, as far as safety, like saving files, do you save it every other day, or you know, how do you do that? What I would say is this program right here, I'm working right now, it's saving to my local hard drive. I have an IT company that keeps an eye on this whole machine. Everything at night is sent to their off-site hard drive, and that's a local company, but it's not locally to me. It's being sent over the internet to their site. It's also being backed up onto my desk onto a portable device that backs up what I'm looking at. And I also use Carbonite, which is a third-party off-site. Every click is being updated, and now that might sound paranoid, but you know, you get into these projects for developers. You're dealing with millions of dollars. The thought of a virus or something wiping this out is just not realistic. You have to have multiple layers of backup. I have had a hard drive failure once. It's a good way to get a heart attack, but everything was backed up. It doesn't mean I'm back up and running that day. I had to then bring it to a place, get a new drive, get all of this data brought over. This is gigs and gigs of memory put back on a new drive. It probably lost 4 business days, but I didn't lose a click of information. So that's paramount when you're doing these big files, and all of that data is in one building. You have to be a little bit crazy as far as how many layers you want to go as far as backup, but I would say 3 minimum, and definitely 1 off-site.
Now, Andrew, do you maintain the name of the file the same as you go, and these archival versions are available through backup, or do you rename the file as you go based on the date? I know different people have different preferences.
You know, I'll save the same file as the same name. The only time I start renaming it, and I'll say it. Let's say this one is called LK Maple. I'll call it V2 version 2. At some point, the design took a change. Homeowner said, "I've got an idea. Can we see what it looks like with a screen porch?" And that actually is what we decided to do. They wanted the screen porch. Right away, version 2 or version 1, whatever that ended up being. This had to get historic board reviews, so there wasn't an enormous amount of changes post. Once the historic board gave us granted the right to do this build, but even then, on the inside, this is now a custom home. Can we open this all up? Can we change the engineering? A lot of the stuff on the 3rd floor changed. They added a bathroom. They might change their mind, and 10 days from now, they're going to say, you know what, we really like what we had 10 days ago. If you keep hitting save as, you can't go back in time. But I can always save it as version 2, version 3, version 4, and that's what I do.
Okay, so when you have major changes, or you know that you want to record a state of things before you change the design, then you save a copy or rename it. So there are some other questions here. Let me just check this. So the saving as a BIMX, not from publisher, question is, where do you find that? Because I responded saying it's just under the save as command from when you're in 3D. Where do you find it? Is it? I can't remember if it's changed now. So you're in the model and you're going to.
Oh, if you're going to save something as a BIMX file?
Yeah. Where is
I
that?
would just drop it on the desktop. I would literally say
No.
save as.
Where's the command is the question, because Eric Zerong was saying, I looked under the file save as and it wasn't a format available.
Are you sure you're in the 3D window?
Well, just go to 3D and let's just see that.
Yep, okay. I'm not sure if it's, let me think, where did I have that?
Is it a separate command under the file menu rather than save as? Because he's right that it's not under the.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. And this is 21, so this is the latest version.
So just cancel this and go to the file menu and just see if there may be a publish BIMX or something like that. I can't remember. There used to be some different commands.
What was that, Eric? Go to what?
Under the file menu.
Yep.
Publish BIMX hypermodel is available there. So that's, I guess that instead of save as, it's been moved to.
Oh, you're right. So let me just do that real quick, just so that's clear. So if let's say I wanted to send these porch posts as a BIMX file, I would say file, publish BIMX hypermodel, and then it's going to publish just this.
Right. Okay, good. Going to, let's see, do you work in core only or do you have the full composite showing in plan when you design? It's from Paul Adams.
The composite, what you're going to see, does he mean the complex profile?
Yeah, in other words, you're dimensioning to the core of the wall, the framing, or do you show the full composite while you're working?
You know, I'm measuring in the field the existing house. So I'm basically going finished wall to finished wall. I'm going to put in here a temporary dimension tool that's going finished face to finished face, because that's really all I know in reality. I wouldn't know the actual depth of everything in that wall. But when I send it out to the builder, it's going to be one of two ways. A framing plan can certainly go out core to core. In other words, it's going to measure this interior core so that we don't have all these finishes shown up as dimensions, or just give them the goal of I want a finished 12-foot dimension top to bottom in this office. So that's actually a dimension that went out the door. So that was saying, I'm not giving them a core. I'm saying I'm giving you my end goal. I want that to be a finished 12 feet. And then they'll accordingly set that stud up, knowing they're going to build this up with 5/8 and they're going to build that up with 5/8. A lot of times it's easier doing that, because when you start going core to core or measuring the core and you're using 5/8 sheetrock, you're immediately throwing somebody into fractions of an inch. It's going to show 12/3 and 2/8, and it's harder to add on the fly in the field than it is just showing finish.
Okay.
So it really does depend. A renovation is a little bit different than something new. On a new construction, you could easily just say core 2x6, 2x4.
So some other questions related to that. So do you use the renovation filter for demo and the demo and the design? So
do I use the renovation filter in a design? Yeah. So in other words, if this is showing just here, if I click on 3D model existing, now that's 3D model existing everything. Anything that's going to show up three-dimensionally is what would have been modeled. And then that will also be part of a demo plan. But as far as design goes, yeah, I'll work with this right now as a trace reference, and that will be underneath my new floor, and I can start coming out here and thinking, well, where is this porch? Where does the new kitchen come?
okay. So, but you are using the renovation filters. I can see down at the bottom of your screen where you have the tab bar,
yep.
The existing plan. And if you were just to make the one single change from existing plan in that the renovation filter and change it to, you know, new construction or plan status, just
yep.
go ahead and let's just see what comes up.
Yeah. So you're looking at right now existing, which is showing, if I click over here, it's showing existing and demo. This wall is coming down. Now, this is not a demo plan. This is an existing plan. That wall, if I highlight it, highlight the wall, it's on the demolition layer. If I come over here to the renovation filter and say, now take me to new, you'll see that immediately changes. Demos disappeared. Anything new is showing up as green. Existing is still there. And then you can change this filter. So I can turn that to be green or not green, or
Yeah. So
whatever that wants
I
to be.
I think the main question was, are you using this, and absolutely you're using the Graphisoft's filtering for this type of project. Do you find any limitations? Some things like, classic thing is you want to rip off the siding and put on new, a new cladding or something like that, and you actually have to show that you're demoing the entire wall, even though you're not. So are there some issues that you've had where you just can't do it and you have to work around that?
Yeah, I've had that, and I've had that on certainly on other projects where they'll say, we're not going to go up with a 5-inch clapboard. We're going to, the first floor is going to be something else. So a couple ways to do that. It's difficult. You could certainly do a graphic override and say, leave my existing wall, even though I'm going to put it on the demolition layer. It might still show up as a, not dotted. And then you can either use a morph on the outside that's the thickness of siding, and you might open up that entire elevation and put one big material at 5/8 inches thick with this new material right on the wall. Now the limits on that, if they said let's put another window in here, you'd have to go back in and create a hole in that morph. So that does create some problems. I've had that certainly comes up.
Okay.
And then we start thinking, is that
so you're using what's there and working around what limitations there are. Question from Ignacio Garcia: how did you do the door and window moldings? They're not profiles. So are you using the morph tool to do a tubular run of a shape?
Yep. So I'm gonna open up this real quick. Now these are renderings. The reason I'm showing these is now this project is now built at this point, and we're deciding what moldings we're going to put on the interior. These can be sourced from a catalog. They can be downloaded as a DWG or a DXF file from that source. If it's a local lumberyard or something that's going to run that profile, that is now a 2D file. You take that 2D file, place it on a scratch pad or a worksheet or on your floor plan, and then click inside that little profile and create a morph. And then that morph is then mitered flat on plan to give you this look. Same with this cornice, and I'll show you in floor plan what that looks like. But we will then model this and send these images to the homeowner so that they can flip through this and say, do we like A, B, C, and I can quickly change through these. So I'll model that base, which is a true DXF file coming off the internet from a local source, that toe mold. This is a 2-piece casing to scale. And that's another place where I get the one-on-one. I can print this one-on-one to a builder and say, this is exactly what that's going to look like. So these then create renderings. This rendering is the living room that you saw in the floor plan. These are simple couches and cocktail tables that I'll pull off the internet, BIM objects or BIM components, change the material and plop them on the plan. Stock ArchiCAD TV. But I will apply those moldings throughout. So every window will have a morph, 3-legged morph. Now that's not 3 pieces. Remember, you can always highlight the 3 morphs and Boolean objects, turn it into one morph.
Can you demonstrate? I mean, is that something that you're comfortable with showing, just how you would create the morph around a window?
So what I did
would be very helpful to people.
Yeah, I'll show you this. So what ended up happening is this is an actual living room. I measured it in the field. We demoed it. In other words, we demoed all the interior finishes. In reality, this was 3 inches out of square. By the time we reframed a lot of this and put in replacement windows, it almost becomes a different dimensioned building. In other words, if I'm measuring a true 18 and 11 and a half finish to finish when I measured a year ago is probably 2 inches off because something grew or didn't grow. So now that it has to be exact, the mill worker really needs to know what that's going to look like exactly. I'll model that room again and just put it on the construction layer. And then take, let me see where I have an example. These are different coffered layouts. See how I have written void? They changed the idea, came up with something else. But if I zoom in on this, I'll show you how I modeled this. Now, I'm going to just select each one of these. So if I select that, you see that that's a morph, morph. These are all morphs, and they are coming off of a 2D drawing that I alt-clicked with the morph tool and then rotated. This casing, zoom in here, these are DXF or DWG files created on the plan, and I'll show you how I did that, but this is just a morph. Now, a lot of fast ways to do this. Complex profile. Let's see if I got one in here. Let's say a molding like that. Now I'm in complex profile. This was a molding that they were going to use on the wall of the living room. It measures 2 1/8. Now, as a complex profile, I can come over on this floor plan and draw that, what I call a wall. It's a complex profile, but it's going to show up in the wall tool. Once it's drawn, highlight it, right click, turn it into a morph. Let me see if I have a doorway. Here's a very simple version of the exact same thing. This is drawing the mantle that you saw in that rendering. This was a complex profile. It's a cut piece of stone. It's going to be off the internet. I'm going to download it, drop it on the floor plan. It's now just lines and circles. Here it is. So if I highlight that, you can see that's just lines. On the non-plot layer, new, because this is part of the new. If I jump back for some reason, I need to go over to the existing floor plan. I don't want all this stuff to show up. This is now new, or it is a new mantle. So I will use the morph tool, space bar, and then when you click on that, it's going to give you a morph, and it's going to ask you what height. If I say 10 feet, I'm going to rotate it and drag those morphs around this, cut them just like you would real stone, and then eventually come up with something like this. Now, this was another sample they were looking at, but that right now is a morph, and this was a kind of a dry laid limestone, but you can certainly change the material to whatever you want. But that's how that's created, and it's mitered on the plan. So I'll miter that before I tilt it up. This happened to be cut and did a real return. And the reason I know that is from the website. When you look at the website of this fireplace up close, that's how they did that. So you do really need to spend some time just studying what you're going to model before you model anything.
Okay, so that's I think a helpful explanation of how you approach the morph setup, doing it in 2D on the plan, and then doing some manipulation, and then essentially installing it into place. And if you think about it, it's somewhat like what the carpenters are doing. They're cutting these pieces off to the side, and then they're nailing them or installing them. let's move on. There are some other questions here. Um, at what stage do you turn ArchiCAD objects into morphs in case you have some changes to make on the object? I imagine this is whenever you really need to make a change, you do it, but you delay things until you have more certainty about what your requirements are.
I think the best way to approach that is to always be able to go back in time. So now this is a custom home. So this fireplace mantle, we went through probably 6 or so different ideas, different materials, different sizes. What do we want to do over that? How big is the TV? It's a live project. So right now, this is why I X this out. As a company, Eldorado Fireplaces, they make the Eldorado stone. That's a profile I pull off their website. I'm throwing these numbers in here just so I know roughly what is the scale of that without having to measure it. But these are morphs. I'll turn it into one morph, rotate it, put it in the plan, and not turn it into an object. There's really no reason. At that point, it's just selling that image. Are they going to build, are they going to build that mantle? Don't need to turn it into an object. If I'm going to use it multiple times and these are the true dimensions of that stone, it's not, I can't roughly make that 41 inches. It's being delivered as a 40 by 61 and I really like it and I might use it on another project. Certainly open it in 3D, save it as an object that you'll recognize and put it in your company's, let's say, library. And in a library, you'll remember what that name is. So
Okay,
not everything is turned into an object.
Yeah, I think it was actually the inverse he was talking about, taking an object that already exists in the library or that you download and then saying, oh, but I really need it to be a little differently. So then you would turn it into a morph and potentially manipulate it. But let's go to another question that I think is of great interest. It has to do with the template. You know, Andrew, I'm pleased to know that you got started with Master Template a while back, a number of years ago, and that you've continued to use Master Template as the basis. For those of you who may not know, I've been developing Master Template since 2007, so over 10 years now, different versions. And Andrew is using Master Template as a basis. So the question came up let's see where, from Michael Kraus. Do you have a template that you use to start each project? Did you start with Master Template or did you develop your own from scratch? So in this case, it is Master Template. Do you, what you'll see, just, I mean, very briefly, in any template is you'll see a combination of resources like wall assemblies, you know, composites and profiles, layer names, which are, you know, help you to just place things in a convenient way so that you can drive your layer combinations in your views. These are the things that are part of a template, as well as the view map, which allows you to jump to different places quickly. Andrew, how much have you customized on top of Master Template? Obviously, you've created tons more complex profiles and composites because of the type of work you do. Looks like most of the rest of the structure of Master Template is relatively intact. What other changes have you made?
Basically, complex profiles, materials or surfaces. I'll have my own library of surfaces that I use. Let's say I've either created them, whether it's a stone or an outside shingle. We do a lot of shingle roofs. I want something that looks very realistic. I'll use that either on another project and put that in my template, which will be in my library that loads every time I open up a new file. You can always use, you know, I don't need to use every one of these. So sometimes if something's very specific, the next project, these aren't going to load. If I see that, you know, I really use this a lot, then you would use a, you know, command where you can bring in that and then save it as a bin built or your file name. And it doesn't carry that LK Maple, which is going to be a project a year from now, will be a year-old project. So you can certainly use, flip over here.
So it seems like, you know, you're making project-specific and office-specific composites and complex profiles.
Yep.
surfaces for just having the appearance, the paints and the wood, etc. You're supplementing on top of what's built into the template, which is always going to be the case for any office doing work. But it seems like you're using the basic framework of master template, which I'm pleased to see you're able to get the job done, and that it's been an efficient environment for you. One of the things that I'll just point out is Andrew has graciously allowed me to post a copy of this file. We haven't done it yet because he has to take off the client name and some other information, but this file will be available on the ArchiCAD user website for members who are silver level. So I'm going to just take a brief commercial break, even just for 1 minute, and say that the ArchiCAD user website is free for watching these webinars, and it's free for the user directory, and there's going to be a lot of free stuff. But if you want to support the work, if you want to support me putting in the time to develop a great resource, then for a small monthly fee right now, $19 a month, you can become a silver member, and then you'll be able to get downloads. And so one of the things that you'll be able to download is actually the BIMX and the PLN file that Andrew provides, as well as what Tim Ball has shared. So I'm going to be setting that up over the next week, and that is something that I think will enrich your understanding, all of you who are watching this recording or on this live call, because I think that we all can help each other, and it can be a win-win. And I really think, Andrew, you're so gracious to spend the time to share this with us. Let me just see if there's some other questions that we should finish up. We've been going about an hour and a half, so I don't want to go much longer. So there is a question of the power outlets. Are they just objects or 2D symbols? And how do you do your electrical and lighting plans? That's an interesting.
What was the first question?
The power outlets, are they just objects or are they 2D symbols? So are you modeling them in 3D so you can see the outlets? And then how do you do your electrical and lighting plans? It'd just be interesting to see that particular drawing.
Yeah, the electric plans, the only time, and it really gets into a very specific type of architecture. If somebody needs to have an outlet, a three-dimensional outlet, jump to the electric. On a project like this, they are not 3D, they're 2D as far as outlets and switches and things like that. There are some projects where we've done that are contemporary, and that switch or outlet plays a critical role where it lands. Now that's when people do shiplap, walls, and you want it to land at a very specific height, or there's a backsplash. That backsplash has an exact number, and that outlet either needs to be dead center of it or above it. Then it is a three-dimensional file, and it's showing up on the section drawing. This file, the outlets are 2D. The wiring is just either a circle or a spline.
Can you show your lighting plan or your electrical plan?
Yep. I can pull up trying to think where the hell I have it. But this is now showing the sheet, but you can see this is what I would call a schematic. This is done more for building permitting. What's truly built in the field would have been done on the fly in the field. In other words, we're walking through this with an interior designer, a lighting designer. They've gone to showrooms and they've sourced different files for what they want to do and where they want to do them, and are they pin lighting this fireplace. So this is very generic. I might just throw this together to get a permit, and not every state requires that. In New Jersey, you have to have an electrical sheet showing the amount overall of what you're going to do. But this right now doesn't carry data other than it might, oops, I'm still in a drawing. This little image right here is carrying just 2D data. That's not showing up live on the ceiling. Certainly could be done that way, but this, I wouldn't have known what we were going to do in here at this stage. That this is literally 9 months ago, and this house is now being built. So where do we put every single one of these outlets? Would have required looking into the framing, looking into the exact kitchen design. Where do we want pendants? Are there 3 or 2, or what size are these? What stove do they pick out?
So you're doing this in this case just for permitting and letting other specialists determine how the wires are run and exactly the position of certain lighting.
This something like this would have been more realistic, where we're modeling. They're going to put something on the ceiling that does drop down decoratively and throws off light, and they might ask, can I see what that fixture looks like modeled and sitting on that ceiling, and something over here over this little built-in. Now that's not updated on the electric plan because I didn't need to. We've already have a permit, and it's not something required for me to do that. So a lot of times the idea of having this snapshot of just a picture perfect model really isn't the way to go about this. This is a live project, and it is a means to an end. And I know that probably hurts a lot of architects to say that, but this file is helping out people in the field to build a real structure.
So is a question in terms of the time you put in from Sherry Weaver, how many hours do you have in the plans and modeling? Do you have a rough budget in terms of your hours?
Yeah, so a project like this, I would certainly, it does depend on how we're going to build these up front. Is this a client up front, or is this a developer? This switched hands a couple of times. This project was done hourly as far as architectural billing, and how many hours I have on it, it's still running. But to model something like that, I would say after you measure, document, and start your model, to really create an accurate 3-dimensional model with all of the components. And when I say all the components, I mean the outside corner boards, trim work, even the components like this on the outside where you'll see this type of stuff. Probably 3 weeks, maybe even longer, 4 weeks. And that's working in an office, being interrupted every 30 seconds by another email and another phone call and another job site visit. So, roughly something like that.
Would you say 4 weeks at 20 hours of time, like 80 hours? Or
yeah, you're probably looking at probably between 80 and 90 hours to really put together a full usable model of this size.
Okay. And then in terms of your initial survey, that would be a separate budget of time. How long did you spend on that?
Field measuring a house like this, I would say 2 to 3 full days on site. And okay, that's photographing it. I mean, 3 days would be a comfortable number to say you can get.
So 20 to 25 hours. And then in terms of, you said that you had an interesting image of the race car. You don't start the car driving until you've already got the whole thing set up. So you were talking about getting all the 2D stuff. So was that 2D setup included in your 4 weeks that you were talking about, or is that something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say by the time before I even clicked and started my first wall, I already had, and not including measuring, but just working, opening up a template and starting to preload this information would take an entire day. Mm-hmm. Now, okay. I'm not, let's jump on this wall. I am not opening up that wall. I'm going to click edit. A wall like that, I didn't start from scratch. I'll start a wall that's very similar to that, save it as something else, hopefully with this new name, adding 2 spaces so that it jumps up to the top alphabetically, and then go in here and alter this, make this bigger, stretch this, add another layer.
Okay.
So and then save it as
you're leveraging and reusing and adapting your existing body of work, which of course is the smart thing to do. But so we're talking about maybe 3 days of field measurements and another day of sort of getting things set up to start, and then possibly 3 to 4 weeks of half time in your office modeling. So we're talking about maybe 100 hours from sort of start of measurement to having the model. Now, is that for the as-built model? The existing?
Yeah, nah, I'd probably do the as-built even faster than that. But as far as then doing the modeling of what's new, yeah, I'm certainly gonna throw on a lot more hours doing all of that. But remember, I'm using complex profiles that are already created and then matching something to duplicate what's already there. I'm not recreating another profile.
Right. Okay.
So some of
Well,
that's been
that I
sped
think
up.
gives people a sense of the magnitude of the effort to get something as detailed as this. Specific question from Andrew Fedorovitz about how do you create the sloping stone handrail on the front external stairs? So a modeling question there.
Okay. Does he mean right here?
Well, I don't know, but if that's the front one and has a sloping stone handrail, and you know what?
Okay, so I'll tell you exactly how to do that. Let me spin the sun around so you can see this. Now, that is an object. Now, I made that. I drew that two-dimensionally, turned it into a morph, knew that I was going to use a bunch of these, made it in an object. And then with the morph tool, you can either cut this or use a solid element operator. This right here is a beam. It's a complex profile. Remember, I changed the name, LK Maple porch railing, but it's not a wall, it's a beam. A beam, you can give it a slope. So here is what it looks like in profile. It has two, and I can go to that up close if you need to see that, but this is not a wall, it's a beam, and a beam gives you the ability to incline it, and it's inclined exactly what I need,
So,
tread to tread.
so you're using objects and beams in this case. Have you started to work with the new stair and railing tools in ArchiCAD 21?
Yes, I have, and I've done a lot more modeling manually, just getting up to speed with the stair tool. So, and I'll show you that. But this right here is that top profile that he was looking at. So that's that handrail top, handrail bottom, and what will go in here is that turned baluster, and gives me the ability to make this taller because it's actually the exact same profile. It's a little bit shorter on the slope and it's taller on the railing around the porch, but both of these are checked. You can see it's not just a wall, it's a beam.
So just as a side note, from what I can see, you could model this now with the new railing tool because you can pick balusters as objects. So in other words, the objects that you had there, as instead of repeating them manually, they can be in the railing tool. And
Yep.
you can also have whatever complex profile. If you open up that profile definition, or you have it open, there is an option. If you say edit it, you can see in the use with, there is now an option for the stair railing. So it's like underneath the wall and the beam, there's the railing and object. So that's object and that is railing. So if that was checked, then that could be used directly within the railing tool. Now, generally what you'd want to do is have the upper part one piece and a separate thing for the lower part, because then in the railing tool, you can say the top rail is this height and the bottom rail is that height. And of course you could mix and match, etc. So, but you could now do that with the railing tool. So what you've been doing manually with different pieces, you could do it in, let's say, something that's more of an intelligent object, run a railing around here or run a railing up the stair.
Yeah, I believe you can do that for, I mean, if you jump back to the model, this had a couple different types of rails and types of fences. It had a cedar fence.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that I modeled, but this was actually there in reality. They had this little metal pipe railing, and that concrete
Mm-hmm.
corner post was part of an existing condition.
Okay.
So yeah, you could do all of that in that same tool.
So there's one question. I'm going to call this the last question for just a technical one, and then we can finish up. This is from Christoph Petrus. I'm not sure where Christoph is from, but he asked, could you please show how you sort the end of the complex profile, the wall or beam out? Is it a complex profile converted to morph and put at the end of the complex profile? Now, I'm not quite sure what his question is, but I will ask you, from what I know, when you have a complex profile and you run it and it ends and you don't do a return, the end cut is got a uniform material or uniform surface. In other words, you
Yep.
paint it white
Yes.
or you paint it gray or black or whatever, even though the parts that run along could be different surfaces and appear differently. What is your solution for that? Do you, does this not come up very often because you're always returning things and having them die into another surface?
No, absolutely not. So what you would end up doing there is having to create a, let's see, if I don't think I have what's that type of end cap on a cornice, but let's say what he's talking about is over here. If this just was a flat piece right here, I would model that with a cap. So I would open up a section window, look at that perfectly in perpendicular view, and place a morph and end cap that with the same material. This just happened to be everything returned on itself, but that's how you would do that. In other words, if this came around, whether even right here, if this whole thing was just a flat end plate, you're not doing that in complex profile. You are modeling that end piece. You
Mm-hmm.
might even see that. I think this gutter, sometimes I'll model the gutter. That happens to be the library part, and it gives you the ability to put an end cap on that. But if this was a very unusual shape and not a gutter or something else, I would just model that with either the slab or the morph tool. The morph tool is nice because you can put it right where you want in a section and then just go to the plan and put it in the correct location plan. But you would have to model that. These, even though a lot of these cornices, jump up to another cornice, these don't carry all of that interior data. This one is a little bit different where I'm showing each individual piece. But if obviously if that ends, it's going to have an open or a void on the top of it. I would have to then place something to cap that.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been incredibly interesting, I think, for everyone. I'm looking forward to actually getting my hands on your project. You did send me a version of it, and I made sure I could open it, but I'll wait for you to send me one that doesn't have the client information on it, so we can post that. I think that just being able to look at things and say, how was this built? And then at least being able to select them and, look at the settings as well as just explore around. Okay, let's look at the 2D stuff that you got down there and what are the sort of things that you're drawing in 2D versus 3D. I think it'll be quite fascinating to study that. So thank you so much for sharing a challenging project. And I think, dealing with historic structures with this much detail. Oh, what is this? This is your library of molding profiles?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this isn't going to pertain to, whoever's watching this all around the world. But, in this area, when you're doing a lot of historic structures, there's companies that actually make these moldings. And these moldings are coming from a catalog. And if you zoom in on one of these, these are lines and arcs, and this is where I might come into something and say, all right, I need a railing, or I need a top rail. Maybe not even sourcing this company, but at least it's a start. And you might build up these profiles, and then when there's an actual builder on board, he's working with this company, we'd like to source our moldings from there, I'll go on their website. But in the meantime, I'll certainly have multiple preloaded files. Something like this is AZEK is a company that makes a synthetic exterior material. This is made out of urethane. These are right off of their website. This is a DWG or DXF, and then I'll trace that so I get exactly what I need, and then that will become a more for a wall or a complex profile. But that's where I get into preloading all of this stuff.
And so this is these are worksheets within.
Yeah, these are worksheets. Yep.
Within this file, and I assume that a lot of them are in your template, so that when you start a project, you've got all of those moldings in 2D. So an interesting point, just from a training perspective, is the 2D data that's in the worksheets, in this case, really doesn't add to the file weight very much. And if you don't open up that worksheet, it's not in your way. When you want to get a molding, the ability to go in there, select that, maybe eyedrop it with the fill tool to create a fill that follows that profile, that contour, and then just paste that fill into a complex profile editing window. Allows you to create a profile for a new molding within seconds, essentially. So having this resource that obviously Andrew has taken the time to bring in manufacturer's stuff, it pays off handsomely just in terms of the speed of being able to represent things. So that's a smart use of your time, putting into the template some of these, essentially your reference library of moldings in this case. Yep. One thing we didn't talk about, and I guess there's so many different things that aren't we haven't been able to get to, but detail drawings. Can you show us a typical detail, and how much of it is the detail coming from the 3D model versus 2D? I mean, I would imagine that a lot of the detail comes directly from the model.
Yep. So basically, if I come over to the model, anything exterior is going to be a one-to-one. I'm not going to add a whole lot other than notes and dimensions. I'm not looking to recreate something. Interior moldings weren't sourced yet, so that came afterwards. And that is why I have a lot of things over here X'd out. We're going to try this. We want to do this molding. But as far as details that went into a construction set of drawings that went out to the building permit for all of the exterior rakes and cornices and brackets, that was on a detailed sheet, which then became a link to the drawing. Now this might have come afterwards. This is actually doing a one-to-one scaled drawing, which I would print out here and then hand to the builder, and as well as add these dimensions.
All right, so there we have, certainly one-to-one detail, so high level of detail in there. How much of that came from the 3D model?
Everything. The only thing that doesn't come from the model, I might have gone in here and either added some highlights so that this, let me see if this was all highlighted. See how that's got a really bold black line? That bold black line was most likely added in 2D. Obviously the notes. So that I probably cleaned that up just so that graphically it prints well, and then printed it. This happened to be half scale, 6 inches. Mm-hmm. Let's see if I've got another one.
Okay, so
here, this is right off the model. That's why it's even pulling up these funny brown colors.
Yeah, so much like Tim Ball, who demonstrated last month, the model is in such clear detail that you can create the details without any drafting. I mean, essentially, yes. or almost no drafting. So that's awesome.
Another point or two is I know at some point my profile is going to become this. It's not as if it'll never get there. At some point, somebody's going to have to build that, and I get the call, can you please send me this exactly like you have on the model. So when I'm modeling it, I'll put in temporary dimensions just so that that doesn't show up at some really odd fraction and everything becomes an odd fraction. Now, I can't do that everywhere, but for the most part, you want these to be numbers that are legible. You don't want something to say 5 and 31/64. You know, you can change that in your dimension settings, but even when you're laying it out, I'll make sure it's laid out so that when I click Control M, I'm not getting these very unusual fractions of an inch. I want it nice and clean. When I go to make that detail, I'm just going to click on this 1, 2, 3, click, 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 and these all show up. I don't have to then get in here and try to manipulate where that hit.
So we're going to have to finish up because there's actually another webinar, not for ArchiCAD, but for on this account for the Architect Marketing Institute that I share this account with, coming up at the top of the hour. There is one more question. There's always one more. Of course, Steve Nickel says, "I know it's late, but how do you do your curved roofs?" So I did see in your drawing, you know, you had a little swoop.
I can show you that. What I like to do is, I'm going to find the 2D file. This is, turn off bold. So this is me pasting a quick section and then saying, okay, I know I want to do a curve here, or flare. This line represents a 2x10. So that's actually a finished piece of 2x10 sitting on a plate, sitting on the subfloor, outside rim joist. Here's the ceiling. This is an 11 7/8 engineered lumber. I'll create all these pieces. Then I'll start putting in these moldings and I'll think, I want this to project, let's say, almost 2 feet. Then I need to come up with a radius. So that's a circle. And it's exactly 10 feet. It's not some weird number, 9 feet, 11 and 57/64. That doesn't help me, and it's not going to help a carpenter. They're going to scream at you. So you have to give them round numbers. And then I'm going to work off of that. So to get this roof to profile like that, jump over here to the plan, is actually done with a few roof components. Let me just pull that up. Okay, this one I did differently because I had to cut this in. I had to do something here with this dormer. 99% of the time, that right there, I turned this into a morph for a different reason. For most of the time, this would have been 3 roofs. It would have been a roof 6 inches in at a very low pitch, a second roof, let's say 8 inches in at a certain pitch, and then the rest of this. So if I go back to the floor plan, let's see here. You can draw your garage or your building and just pretend you have hip roofs. And in the hip roof tool, you can use this command, which is saying multiplane. And when you get into a multiplane roof, you can start changing. See this little tab here? You can say how many planes, how many times is this going to change in the course of where you click to start. So if I say add, see each one of these, it's going to come over a dimension at a certain angle, then it's going to change and it's come up to 2, dimension 2, and then you have to just plug in what those numbers are and you will get a 3-planed or 4 or 10 or whatever planed roof showing up as a curve. It's not a perfectly smooth curve. It shows up just like this. It shows up with these little facets.
Okay, so I think that's given us a glimpse as to how you approach it. Obviously, as I said, we have to finish for the top of the hour. So I'm going to just take over the screen now. Let me just make myself presenter here and show my screen. And I'll just come back on camera here. I think I should be back on camera there. All right, so Andrew, I want to thank you for an awesome presentation. I just had an interesting idea that I'm wondering if people would find useful. Obviously, there were a lot of things that Andrew did and demonstrated briefly, or didn't have a chance to demonstrate it, just explained briefly, that I could expand on. In other words, I could take this model and do some training tutorial videos. If you think that this would be a useful exercise, then let me know here in the comments, because I could, for example, show how to create that curved roof. Obviously we ran out of time right now, but I could show that, or creating the molding around the windows with the morph tool. Just demonstrate that. I think it could be an interesting way to leverage your model in the sense of, it's so much more interesting to demonstrate something in context than to just do it, in a little empty file. So as I said, Andrew's kindly offered to share the BIMX file as well as the actual PLN, so I'll be getting that ready. If you're interested in downloading things, then you need to go to the membership info here in ArchiCAD User. And in addition to registering just for a free membership, you can get a silver membership, and then you're going to be able to get the downloads that are going to be offered. And so this week, at least through the end of this week, and I don't know, I might extend it a little bit, just have that at a lower price. Basically, this just helps me to afford to spend the time on this. It's a passion project, I would say, to help ArchiCAD users, but obviously, this is how I make my living. And so if you'd like to support that work and have me spend the time to make it even more rich and useful, then become a member. And if you'd like even more help from me, a gold membership will give you membership in my coaching program, where you can actually